Chair is on his way. I'd like to call to order the Executive Committee meeting for Friday, January 13th. Could we have approval of the minutes or any change? One motion. Here he is. There's a second.
Hey, here he is.
Take a vote before he comes in. Please vote on minutes.
Yeah.
We'll wait for San Diego County to register their approval. Voting's closed. Thank you. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and sorry for the delay. We had a...
You escorted the chargers to the airport or something?
I was doing far more
To the
work
landfill.
this morning.
Be nice.
Why?
Okay, we heard an incredible speaker, Bob Ross, a long time friend. Wasn't that terrific?
Yes, I had to leave before it was over, but yeah, it was great what I heard.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
He was good. So, okay, sorry for being a few minutes late. Okay, with that then, we're public communications. You have one speaker. Is it Marty Graham? Marty?
Hi.
Wherever you feel comfortable. Go ahead. Go ahead, you can sit down.
Thank you so much. I live on, my name is Marty Graham. I'm here as a citizen today. I live on Main Avenue where the bikeway is going through. I'm part of a group of about 16 residents who all have corner houses. We're good with the bike lanes. We think that's a community asset. We can figure out how to work around that, and we are making sacrifices to have the bike lanes, but we're good with that. The problem is with the traffic calming. The staff has chosen to put obstacles at intersections, traffic circles. And we asked in May for some help, and Chairman Roberts, the words that you said to us gave us so much hope because we felt like we were being heard and that somebody was going to work with us. Well, in December, the staff came back with exactly the same plan, and they had added more obstacles. So there will be even more parking taken away. I'm almost 60. I'm almost disabled. My retirement is my house. If I can't park near my little tiny house on a little tiny lot, our houses average about 800 square feet. Our lots average about 1,800. Our garages were built in the 20s, so cars don't go in them anymore. Not since the Cadillac. I won't be able to park anywhere near my house. To make that traffic circle safe, they have to take 2 to 3 cars on every side of the street. So that's 12 to 20 parking spaces on at least 12 blocks in a neighborhood that's already at 102% the statutory capacity for parking. My neighbor is a woman in a wheelchair whose caregivers use that parking. She doesn't know how she's going to be able to stay there either. I have my neighbors across the street are a Marine Corps veteran who, with his wife, just had his first child. And he's trying to figure out how it'll be safe for his wife to come home at night when she has to park across El Cajon Boulevard and walk several blocks. We're scared. We're just normal people. This is really scary for us. And the staff, they met with us and they did the I'm listening face. They argued with us about some things and then they just delivered the same plan. There are better ways to calm traffic. And
Marty,
the
I'm going to have to cut you off because your time is
Okay.
up. But you made your point. It's think it's probably crystal clear to all of us, and I'm hopeful that staff can come up with some options that minimizes the loss.
They stopped
We can
counting.
decide.
When we asked them with a new plan how much parking was being taken, because it's clearly more, they said, we don't have a number.
Well, we're gonna work with you. That I
Thank
will
you,
promise
sir.
you. We're gonna work with you. As a much younger person, I lived up in that area, and there's a lot of places that don't have any parking. And then you start taking parking off the streets, and then you put neighbor fighting neighbor over parking spaces, and it's nuts. So we've got to come to grips with that. And we're trying to ram things through in areas that we're not sensitive enough to, I think. So we're going to bring you support.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Okay, that's the only public speaker we have? Yes, sir. Okay. And we'll move on. The consent calendar, consists of legislative status reports. This is information only. And yeah, unless somebody wants a full-fledged report on this.
Move approval. Second.
Actually, you don't have to approve it, it's just consent. It's information only. It's on consent, but it's information only. The chair report is on the executive director, strategic goals of our executive director and key success indicators. Terry?
I'll present this particular item. This is the goals, areas of emphasis, major initiatives, and key success indicators for our executive director. We met back, this subject was on our December 2nd agenda. We discussed this, and members had some thoughts as to ways of improving and making this even better. We have made some changes in these measures. We've made some additions. Some language has been included in the major initiatives to address some greenhouse gas reductions. I remember Councilmember Gloria made some comments around that. We're emphasizing public transit and active transportation, and with given emphasis there. There's continued emphasis on implementing our regional plan, even though we're still going to be thinking about how that is modified. The revisions under the key success indicators for the capital program, including lists of construction projects and design completion. I remember Councilmember Zapp mentioned some things at our meeting that she'd like some clarity around that information. This is for July 1st through June 30th of this year, so it's the fiscal year 2017. We anticipate presenting this to the board on the 27th and would ask for discussion and hopefully some approval.
Okay. Any questions, comments?
This is for the June 17 to June.
It's fiscal year.
Because of the property postponement.
Right. So we're trying to catch up, really.
So we're doing some catch up for the last 6 months. Or the next 6 months.
Oh, so till June 17.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's only got 5 more months left on this.
If we take another month, we'll be done.
Maybe before then,
Councilmember, I saw
Okay, go,
his hand
question.
over here, Councilmember.
Oh, I found it, I was looking through, I was looking for exactly what it is on attachment 1, is that all of the success indicators?
Yes. It starts out with the major goals, the areas of emphasis, major initiatives where we've added, I think there's some added wording there under first bullet. We've tried to indicate that the success indicators are the kind of the indirect measures of these goals. And I think we've added the list of projects and design projects that we hope to complete in the time period. So I think it provides a little bit more detail that the board members can use to evaluate the
performance.
Just a brief look, I think it does add a lot more specificity in order to do a better actual evaluation.
I think it looks good, and I'd move for approval.
Okay, second. Make a motion, have a second. There's any further discussion? All in favor, signify by saying aye. Oh, we got a vote, excuse me. Not used to this technology in a small group. Okay, and that passes unanimously with all the voting members. Then we'll go on then to the reports, the first review of the draft board agenda. Who's going to do that for us?
So your meeting on January 27th in 2 weeks, we have approval of your meeting minutes from your two December meetings, followed by public comments, communications, member comments, and then actions from the policy advisory committee. And you'll note, we actually explained the title of actions from the policy advisory committee. So from time to time when we ask the board to ratify the actions of your committees with regard to CEQA documents, we will be updating this to show basically show folks that it includes those documents as well. So moving on to consent, you have your standard approval, proposed solicitations, and contracts. We only anticipate one contract award, which will be for the South Bay Bus Rapid Transit Project on segment 3, which is the Otay Mesa Transit Station. And then items 5 and 6 are your standard monthly reports on meetings and events attended on behalf of Sandag and the delegated actions taken by the executive director. Under Chair's report, we have the same item you just concluded, the strategic goals, major initiatives, and key success indicators for the executive director. And then moving on to reports, item 8 would be the proposed 2017 legislative program, which is your next item on your agenda today. Item 9 is the annual review of proposed amendments to board policies and bylaws, also something we'll be talking shortly after this. Item 10, which is the TIFIA loan for Mid-Coast. We will need to move that back a month. We do anticipate getting the draft loan document from the TIFIA office end of next week. And so we'll need some time to review that and we'll anticipate putting that to the board in February. And then under reports, we'd like to also add an additional item. It's going to your transportation committee meeting next week. It's to take in some additional matching funds from 2 of the grantees for the Section 5210 projects. And those are ones for the grantees. They've already been awarded funds for vehicle purchases or specialized transportation services. They did some options on the vehicles they wanted to purchase, and so it's their responsibility to provide additional matching funds. But we need to take it into our budget in order to allow for the vehicle procurement.
So it's for us to accept the additional money?
Yes, and the reason why we need to go to the board is over the $500,000 threshold that transportation committee can accept in terms of budgeting. And then item 11 is one closed session item related to a claim from Site Africa, which is a restaurant here in downtown San Diego. It's related to our downtown BRT station project. And the remaining items, continued public comments. And your upcoming meeting following this January's meeting would be the board retreat.
Okay. Any questions regarding the agenda? Okay, so a motion and a second. Please cast your votes. Voting is closed, and that's approved unanimously. And we move on then to item number 6, which is our draft legislative program. Victoria?
Good morning. Each year, Sandag updates its annual legislative program. The goals serve as a guideline when determining action on possible federal, state, or local activities. There are 2 proposed modifications for this year's legislative program. They are listed on page 27 of the report on your iPad. The first proposed modification is to Goal 8A. On September 14th, Sandag secured a full funding grant agreement with the FTA for the Mid-Coast Corridor project. Staff recommends modifying this goal to be more general while supporting public transit and intercity rail funding. The second recommendation to this year's program would be to add a new goal under the support opposed section. We're listing this as goal number 13B. This would be to support efforts to advance connected and autonomous vehicle technology. Both the state and federal governments have begun to solicit input and policy direction for research planning and demonstration projects. Addition of this goal would address this emerging technology and the potential impacts to the regional transportation system. The Public Safety Committee reviewed its related goals at its November 18th meeting and recommended inclusion to the board. The Executive Committee is asked to recommend the proposed 2017 legislative program for approval by the board at its January 27th meeting. This concludes my report. I would be happy to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Thank you. Any questions regarding these proposed changes?
How does this, how does all this listing of goals work with our advocates in Sacramento and in the federal level? Are they focused on all the entire list, or are they focused on a particular set of goals, or how does that normally work?
I think this just serves as a roadmap that outlines our priorities. So if we're looking, and Sandag's looking to actually sponsor legislation, it's actually denoted higher, so that they would see that we would be coming to them and probably asking them for their support on these various topics, versus if they have a question regarding a policy issue such as public safety, they can also take a look and see where the agency has a potential position in the direction of the policy and possible implications to the agency.
So it's more of a roadmap kind of a thing.
And if I could add, it's particularly at the state level, sometimes at the federal level, but more at the state level, the roadmap can be really useful, because when we're tracking bills in Sacramento, and they are changing sometimes from week to week, right? And so, we don't always have the benefit. If there's something big, we're going to bring it back to you guys. But if we bring it back to you guys after they already voted, well, it's too late to try to influence that, right? So, from staff's perspective, we use this roadmap as a way to understand the direction that you've given us. And so, then if something pops up and it's within the legislative goals that you set, allows us to react sometimes a little faster. And I see this more at the state level than the federal level. The federal level, not as big. Those are sometimes larger, bigger, global, national issues. But at the state level, you get to where, the whole process of gutting and amending bills. A farm bill in the San Joaquin Valley today could become a transportation bill in San Diego next week, right? And so both our legislative staff, who do a really good job, I believe, here for us, and our advocates in Sacramento are constantly, monitoring what's happening at the legislature, and this helps, allows us to react without saying, well, wait, we can't react because we still don't know exactly where the board's at.
So do we have any Sandag advocates there in Sacramento?
We do.
We hire them?
Yes.
Okay, like we do in the cities, we hire somebody.
We got an advocate in Sacramento, we got one in
to monitor the process and the committees and then there's
like, there, Mayor, I sort of see them as, there are sort of our ears on the ground, and they monitor everything, but then very often, and as I look around the room, I know Mayor Morrison, for example, has been with us on many times, and Supervisor Roberts, but the Sacramento piece, sometimes it's important we're there, but we gotta know that we should be there, right? And so the advocates help, listen to what's going on, and then if we need to, we'll get on a plane and go try to advocate for what you guys are trying to get done.
we should call them damage control group.
And they're slated to come next month and provide a legislative status report from both the Sacramento and DC representatives.
The acknowledgement of the commitment first kind of ties in with the mayor's announcement of a program between Sandag and the city, and developing autonomous car zones, if you will. So these are all good things that are happening, and I'm glad to see that efficient being made.
So one of our priorities for the city, as you know, and as you heard, is housing affordability and more housing in the city of San Diego. And I understand that there's going to be we're going to support legislative incentives. Is there any legislation that has been authored to support the jurisdictions that's going to,
I'd have to run a report, and I could provide that for you shortly after this meeting.
that would be great, because we need more affordable housing, but we also, I think, need incentives for the jurisdictions to provide opportunities for that, because that's truly one of our priorities, so I would appreciate any information on that.
And on that front, I mean, that's another area where, you know, we collaborate with your advocates and with your staffs at the cities and counties. And, you know, maybe a real life example right now, and Supervisor Roberts has had to rescue me on more than one occasion, because on transportation, there's a debate at the state level about a new transportation bill that would, you know, create new funds to help meet some of the transportation needs. And it's easy for the state to stay focused on the state stuff, right? So they're focused on the state highways, the interstates, the stuff that the Caltrans and the state of California, you know, operates and owns. And we've been working with your advocates in your cities, and sometimes needed a rescue or two, because we've been advocating that trips don't start and end on the freeways, right? That, you know, they start when you leave your house on a local street, and they eventually get off on a local street to get to where you're going to work or where you're going to shop or whatever you're going to do, and that our cities and counties need to share in that whatever revenue source is going to be, so that, you know, we can also have funds for our cities and our counties to improve in some of their streets. And as a result, in the current bills that are in the legislature today, and we're probably way more knowledgeable on those because we track those, you know, pretty intensely. All three of the proposals, there's three proposals. The governor has a proposal, the Senate has a proposal, the Assembly has a proposal, and all three proposals, there are provisions for some of those dollars to also go to our local cities and counties. And so there's an example where we try to collaborate with your advocates and with your staff to not only advocate for the regional needs, but also for our member cities.
Is advocate a nice new language for obvious reasons?
Yes.
Political correct way.
Yes.
Mayor Morrison.
Yeah, well, I think the one other thing is not only just what the tenor of the bills are and how that they address certain subjects, but all too often what we find in the state, not only do they like to look to their own needs first and call that statewide, but they also like to take a look at things and how they might affect a community and then make that statewide. It does, and it has, you know, sometimes it have disastrous effect in another community, but they make this one-size-fits-all type approach, and which is nice, I guess, when you're looking from a telescope 500 miles away out here. It's kind of hard to see how the things that they're doing fit our individual communities, and that's the reason why it's really important for us to be advocating and constantly, I know they don't need education, but enlightening them on how reality is sometimes.
Okay, and we should act on this to recommend that the Board of Directors approve.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second. Please cast your votes. Voting is closed, and that's approved unanimously. Moving on to item number 7. I think I should introduce this one. John's here also. We have spent a lot of time now discussing the second vice president. And let me share with you, because I think what is, in my looking at this issue, there were a couple of things I was concerned with. Number one, you currently have 7 jurisdictions that have term limits. And we've set up a system where we have had heretofore a system that is kind of, is based on like a 6-year commitment. And it just about rules out some of the communities, because it would mean one of their members is almost going to have to get on the board immediately on being elected after a couple of years, and then be elected to second vice chair. And that gave me concern. It was also, when I looked at what are the duties, the official duties of second vice chair, there aren't any except for one. Okay? The only duty is in the absence of the chair and the vice chair to then chair a meeting, should a meeting occur in the absence of those two. So we had a position that's taken that requires kind of a long, tortuous path to get through that is sort of prejudicial towards certain communities that, because of their term limits, it's going to make it difficult for them to get into that 6-year queue. And we had something that didn't seem to me to prepare anybody to be anything. You know, it seemed like it was kind of an archaic thing that probably worked at one time. I wanted to also look at how could we take the chairs of each of our committees and strengthen those positions. Transportation, public safety, planning, what am I missing? Borders. And make those positions a bit stronger. That just, not only were they committee chairs, but they would participate in an even more thorough way as part of this board. And I talked to a number of you, and I talked to people who were adamantly opposed to doing any changes, and I think the suggestions that I made now are getting a pretty good reception. And it's simply this: do away with that position. Let's strengthen the chairs of the committees. And if a chair of a committee isn't sitting in they would participate as a ex officio member. They would be a voting member. But they would be able to be here and be part of the discussions and help to shape what we're doing, but also be far better informed, not only of their own committee work, but what the other committees and what are the other issues. Then we could use each of those chairs in sequence to be the replacement for the chair or vice chair, should they be absent. So, for instance, the chair of transportation might be the first 3 months of the year. That would be the person designated that if the chair and vice chair were absent, you would be the acting chair at any board meeting. The second 3 months, we would take the next, and I don't know what the order would be, let's say it's planning. So each of those chairs would have a quarter of the year that they would be the designated person that would know. Should there be an absence of the chair or the vice chair, they would then cover the meeting. This is what I feel very comfortable in proposing to you and to the whole board, because I think it would be a very effective change for us to meet. And we've had discussions I've had discussions very sophisticated with some of the people that were feeling maybe this was politically attached to keep certain people from being second vice chair. Now those same people are very much seeing that maybe this is a good idea, and I'll leave that for them to articulate that word. But I wanted to bring this here, have a discussion about it, and then we'll have it at the full board report, your recommendation here today. But that was the first of really like 3 items that we wanted to cover here on the agenda. Items.
Right. Thank you, Chair Roberts. So, good morning. Throughout the year, the Office of General Counsel solicits requests for potential changes to Sandag board policies and bylaws, and the Executive Committee and subsequently the board have an annual process to review those proposed changes. And as Chair Roberts indicated, in addition to the other changes identified throughout the course of the year for potential amendment, in late 2016, this board and subsequently the Board of Directors also asked that consideration be made of potential changes that would eliminate the position of second vice chair and add responsibility to the policy advisory chair positions. Each of the referenced policies that we'll speak of today is attached to your report in a red line strikeout format. And for each of the potential updates, I'll discuss some more significant amendments being proposed, referring to the attachment number, the page number in the report, as well as the page number on your tablets. If I go through them kind of quickly, we have a lot to cover, not a lot of time, so please feel free to stop me at any time should you have any questions on a proposed change. And I will start with the bylaws and the board policies that relate to potential elimination of the second vice chair position. As Chair Albert said, the responsibilities of the second vice chair are essentially to fulfill the duties of the chair when the chair and first vice chair are unavailable, and to serve on the executive committee. In terms of the history of the position, this board had asked us to give you a little bit of history on that. It was initially added in 2004. It was eliminated in 2014. At that point, there were concerns that while this had been, the second vice chair had traditionally been on the track of ascendancy to board chair, the increasing prevalence of term limits and the traditional 2-year terms in leadership presented challenges to people, to a lot of jurisdictions being able to serve through that course of leadership. It wasn't reinstated into the bylaws and board policies in December of 2015, recognizing unique challenges that were facing Sandag at that time that might require a depth of leadership, but from then until today has not been filled. So we look at potential amendments that would address this situation. Ultimately, there's 3 things that they would do. They would eliminate reference to the second vice chair. They would include PAC chairs in board leadership on a rotating basis in the event that the chair and vice chair are absent. And to the extent that PAC chairs are not already on this committee, the executive committee, it would add the PAC chairs as advisory or ex officio members to this committee. And in terms of the amendments that would affect those particular changes, the first is attachment 1, the Sandag bylaws, and that begins at page 8 or 41 on your tablets. Various changes are proposed throughout the bylaws, eliminating reference to the second vice chair and referring to the first vice chair as simply the vice chair, since there's only one. Language is also proposed to be amended in Article 3, Section 3E, and that's 10 on the report or 43 on your tablets, that would provide for the vice chair's leadership role at the executive committee, substantially reverting the language to its original form, and we had only one vice chair. Article 5 is proposed to be amended in Section C, that's page 14 of the report or 47 on your tablet, inserting the PAC chairs into the line of board leadership. Under the proposed language, the PAC chairs would serve as a backup to the chair and the vice chair under the title Chair Pro Tem on a quarterly rotating basis. The way that they're in there is simply alphabetical by the PACs. No thought into it beyond that. You're welcome to go in any other word.
Does anybody have any? So what would the borders would be first?
So then it would be Borders, Public Safety Committee, Regional Planning, Transportation.
Okay.
Board Policy 1 would also be amended. That's your operations policy. It's attachment 2 to the report, beginning at page 20 or 53 on your tablet. The proposed amendments to Section B of that board policy, at page 21 of the report or 54 on your tablet, would mirror those in the bylaws, deleting reference to the second vice chair. Additionally, language would be added to that same section, providing that any PAC chair who is not otherwise a member of the executive committee would now serve as an advisory, non-voting member of this committee. The PAC chair's role on the executive committee would also be recognized in the language proposed to be added to Board Policy 2, Policy Advisory Committee membership. That's attachment 3 to your report, beginning at page 26 or 59 on your tablet, specifically at section 112. And other changes are also proposed throughout Board Policy 2, deleting reference to the second vice chair. The proposed edits to Section 6 of Board Policy 2 would recognize the PAC chair's role in board leadership on a rotating basis, as previously discussed with the bylaws. And finally, an amendment to Section 12.2 of Board Policy 16, Procurement of Services, that's attachment 8 at page 71 or 102 on your tablets, would replace the second vice chair with the then current chair pro tem for purposes of approving contract amendments under specified circumstances. And while there's other changes proposed as well, the board policy 2 and 16, as well as other board policies, that completes the proposed amendments relating to the second vice chair position and the increased leadership role for the PAC chairs. If you like, I can pause there or move on to the others.
Any questions or comments from that part? Any questions?
Okay, a lot of work you put into that. I think it's far superior. Thank you for coming up with that. I think training the chairs, given all the term limits, is a good idea. Training the chairs. Anyone who's been a chair of a committee, I think, is more than capable of filling issues in those rare occasions. So anyway, thank you. It's just like amazing all the work you have to get this little thing done. So.
John's very thorough.
Yeah, I'll say.
That's a key. Yeah.
You want to go through the others?
Yes, I'd love to. So the other proposed edits to board policies begin back at Board Policy 2, Policy Advisory Committee membership. And the only substantive amendment to Board Policy 2 is found in Section 7.3, and that's at page 29 or 62 on your tablets. Under the current language, if a voting organization or subregion is absent from 3 consecutive PAC meetings, the policy calls for a notice of those absences to be sent to that organization's governing board members, as well as all other members and alternates of the PAC and all of the board of director members and alternates. The proposed amendment would instead focus that notice just to the body that appointed the representative to the PAC, and that might be San Diego would be city council, the county would be the county supervisors, or potentially sub-regional board members. Excuse me, as well as to the leadership of that PAC. So it narrows the notice that would go out if an organization is absent. Next board policy is Board Policy 7, the Equal Employment Opportunity and Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Programs policy. That's attachment 4 to your report, beginning at page 31 or 64 on your tablets. Sections 1.1 and 1.2 of this board policy are proposed to be amended to reflect the active nature and the broad scope of Sandag's compliance with federal civil rights laws. Amendments are also proposed in those sections to expand the listed protected classifications that are specifically called out in the policy to align with the scope of both federal and state designations of protected classifications. So those scopes ultimately are expanded under the proposed amendment. Additionally, section 1.4 of the policy, page 32 of the report or 65 on your tablet, is proposed to be amended to recognize the Director of Administration's role as Sandag's disadvantaged business enterprise liaison. The next board policy that's proposed for amendment is Board Policy number 8, Legal Matters. And that is attachment 5 to your report. And specifically there, no changes are proposed to the body of the report, but it's only proposed that the claim form, which is attached to the policy and found beginning on page 38 of your report or 71 on your tablet, be replaced with an updated form found 2 pages later. And this is intended to allow a claimant to provide a clearer description of the facts giving rise to their claim and of the damages alleged in it, and ultimately feel it's in Sandag's best interest because it facilitates Sandag making a well-informed decision regarding action on a claim. The required claim contents remain consistent with the requirements set forth in the California Tort Claims Act, but the form does include additional fields that are optional for a claimant to provide additional information to paint a better picture of their incident should they so choose. Additionally, now the form would be in a fillable PDF format and would be in both English and Spanish, and that's something that we're moving toward with all attachments that we have to our board policies. The next board policy proposed for amendment is Board Policy 9, the Discrimination Complaint Procedures, and that is attachment 6 to your report, And the only change to this policy is in section 749 of the report, or 82 on your tablet. And that amendment would add the Federal Highway Administration as a potential recipient of a discrimination claim for projects that involve FHWA funding. And this was requested by the U.S. Department of Transportation in its federal certification review conducted in the middle of last year. Next board policy we'll look at is board policy number 15, records management. That's attachment 7 to your report, beginning at page 54 or 87 on your tablets. There are three primary areas where this policy is proposed to be updated. The first relates to electronic records. Beginning at section 3.6, and that's page 55 on your report or 88 on your tablets. Amendments are proposed to reflect the increasing shift at Sandag from paper records to electronic records. And the proposed update to the policy recognizes prevalence and remove limited circumstances where electronic records would be allowed to take the place of paper documents. So ultimately, we look to get rid of paper and have more things kept in electronic format. The second area of focus is in the listing of project content, project file contents. Currently, the section 4 of the policy, which is at page 56 or 89 in your tablets, has mandated contents of project files, which have grown to be outdated as the needs and what areas are focused on in projects change. So this instead would have the Sandag Procurement Manual, which is updated regularly and addresses the same topic, dictate the contents of project files and remove them from the board policy. And this would avoid continued amendments for this policy to remain accurate as project needs change. And the third area of focus here is in public records. And that is section 6 of the policy, beginning at page 57 or 90 on your tablets. Previously, the board policy set forth some, but not all, of the requirements of the California Public Records Act. And rather than providing an incomplete list of the requirements of the statutes and cases relating to public records, the amendments would instead broadly mandate that responses to records requests shall be fully compliant with the California Public Records Act and all other applicable laws, and recognize the priority that must be given to records requests due to the short response time mandated in the relevant statutes. So overall, we feel that this would make that policy more compliant with state law by addressing things more generically and letting the state law dictate the details of it. Next board policy is board policy 16, procurement of services, and that is attachment 8 to your report. We're proposing amendments to section 7 of this policy at page 65 or 98 on your tablets relating to conflicts of interest. This portion of the policy addresses the broad topic of drawing lines between firms who design or oversee construction as services and those of firms who actually construct projects. And generally speaking, a firm cannot be on both sides of that line, either because it would create a conflict of interest and unfair competition for them, or because it could put them in a position of policing their own work. The proposed amendments here would remove the specific project delivery methods, either design bid build or design build, and instead generically refer to them as construction projects, since they may now include other project delivery methods, such as construction manager, general contractor, which we're employing on the Mid-Coast project. Additionally, section 12 of this policy is proposed to be amended, and that relates to elimination of the second vice chair, as we previously discussed. Next board policy we looked at is board policy 18, regional transit service planning and implementation. That is attachment 9 to your report, beginning at page 72 or 105 on your tablets. And there's two primary areas that are proposed for amendment in this policy. And the first one relates to amendments to terminology, as those terminologies are used here at Sandag. And that is throughout the policy, beginning in the second paragraph. First of all, It would involve the combination of the Regional Comprehensive Plan, RCP, and the Regional Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy, combining those into the regional plan as the board has adopted over the past few years, those two as a combined document. Additionally, it recognizes a combination of the Regional Short-Range Transit Plan and the Coordinated Public Transit Human Services Transportation Plan as a coordinated plan, and again, that reflects current practice. The second modification that's proposed is at section 1.2.1.2, and that's page 75 of the report, or 108 on your tablet, referring to a low-income threshold and the definition of that. That section defines low-income populations for the purpose of impacts of service changes and analysis of those impacts on those low-income populations, and that is proposed to be amended from 150% of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services poverty guidelines to 200% of that. And that threshold was adopted by the Sandag Board in conjunction with the most recently adopted regional plan, and that was with input from community-based organizations and in accordance with federal Title VI regulations. And changing that threshold increases those populations that we would look at to potentially be impacted as we consider the impacts of service fare changes. And again, that change would make the board policy consistent with current practice. The next board policy that we looked at is board policy number 24, procurement and contracting for construction. That's attachment 10 to your report, beginning at page 82 or 115 on your tablets, and specifically, the first one that we'll discuss is section 1.2 at that next page, page 116 on your tablets. The proposed change would clarify the timing of the publication period that Sandag makes in procuring these services, and clarify that it specifically refers to the first publication, since there are multiple publications. So it establishes a more firm deadline. And it restates the minority and community newspaper publication requirement as one calculated to best meet Sandag's DVE goals. And the reason for that is because while the current language calls for specific publication in a specific DVE or small business directed newspaper or trade publication in the Sandag region, Sandag staff has been unaware of any specific newspaper that fits that particular definition. And so instead, we would look at how do we best meet our DVE goals, what papers, what publications are out there that meets that broader goal. The title of section 1.3 on that same page is proposed to be amended to clarify its application only to the contractor pre-qualification program or process, rather than generically qualification, which is something we look at post-bid. Section 1.4 of that policy, at page 84 or 117 on your tablets, has various proposed amendments facilitating Sandag's increased use of electronic bidding in addition to traditional handwritten bids that are provided in a sealed envelope. And to facilitate that, a sealed bid would now be designated to include both electronic and written bids. And that electronic system is one that does provide the same confidentiality of the written sealed bids in an electronic format to an outside program. Section 1.5.6.1.2, page 85 of the report or 118 on your tablets, is proposed to be amended to properly apply this section to job order contracts. And there a bid is expressed not just as a fixed price, but instead as a percentage of catalog prices. So it makes that policy also applicable to job order contracts, which is one way that we procure some construction services. Section 1.5.6.2.1, 86 of the report or 119 on your tablet. There, the current language requires a contractor to demonstrate requisite experience for a Sandag project by listing all of its recent projects regardless of relevance, and the proposed amendment is aimed at them listing only projects relevant to the work proposed to be constructed by Sandag. Sometimes we have big contractors who have many projects even throughout the world, and we're really only looking at those that are relevant to us. Section 6, as proposed, the revised wording would make the conflict of interest provisions applicable to all construction projects, regardless of how that project is delivered, not just design, bid, build. And that parallels the changes proposed to Board Policy 16 that we spoke of earlier. And the next board policy is Board Policy 27, Transportation Development Act. That's attachment 11, beginning at page 99 or 132 on your tablets. Amendments are proposed throughout this policy, probably more so than any other. And these proposed amendments are primarily based on recommendations from the Transportation Development Act Triennial Performance Audit. And there, the request was to make these modifications to incorporate recent legislation and to make the policy align with recent legislation and to make the policy more consistent with the language of the statutes that the policy is based upon. So there's a lot of tweaks throughout the policy that are specifically called out in that review. Some of them, initially the background paragraph right there at the beginning would delete the specific tax percentage so that the policy remains accurate regardless of fluctuations in the tax rate that's collected in the county or in a particular jurisdiction, and it reflects a collection of both state and local sales taxes. Various amendments are also proposed throughout the procedures section to align with the language of the referenced statutes, and those are from the California Public Utilities Code, and to clarify procedures for transit development claims. Paragraph 5 of that policy, beginning at page 101 or 135 on your tablets, is proposed to be updated to reflect the addition of funding to bike and pedestrian claims, also for pedestrian safety education programs pursuant to allowance for those in California Senate Bill 508. It also would reflect implementation of the Sandag Bike Early Action Plan and Active Transportation Grant Program, and update the stated deadline for bike and ped fund claims. Amendments to section 6.2.1 of the policy at page 103 or 136 in your tablet are proposed to reflect MTS as the sole operator within a service area. The prior language was drafted at a time when there were a number of operators within that service area. And the table in that section is also proposed to be updated to reflect fare box recovery requirements imposed pursuant to SB 508. Section 8.2 of the policy at page 106 or 139 in your tablets is proposed to be amended to include van pools within the scope of Article 8 claims. And paragraph 9 is relating to STA funds is proposed to be modified to align with the current status of the STA program. Next board policy is Board Policy 31, the Transit Ordinance and Expenditure Plan Rules, attachment 12, and specifically here, looking at Rule 7 of that at page 113 of the report or 146 on your tablet. And that rule includes a requirement for a public vetting of a jurisdiction's program of projects prior to its consideration for inclusion in the Sandag Regional Transportation Improvement Program, or RTIP. And this requirement is stated in the Transit Extension Ordinance, but the ordinance references a public hearing, while the current language of the rule references a public meeting. The proposed amendment would correct this inconsistency. We don't see this as really impacting necessarily how jurisdictions are going to approach this, but instead would just prevent some questions and vagueness in that. Board Policy 36 is the next board policy, and that is the San Diego County Regional Transportation Commission debt policy. That's attachment 13 to your report at page 133 or 166 on your tablets. Sandag's finance team and Public Financial Management, or PFM, our financial advisor, have reviewed this board policy and have proposed a few changes to it. First of all, section 5.2.4 is proposed to be added to the policy. And in addition to the other stated short-term debt instruments that are permitted under the policy, this will allow the issuance of bond anticipation notes, or BANs. And BANs are short-term debt instruments that can be issued by a public agency against the proceeds of an upcoming longer-dated debt instrument. And Pending the closing of the planned transportation or TIFIA loan for the Mid-Coast Corridor Transit Project, Sandag may wish to issue short-term notes or bands that would be taken out and repaid by a draw on the TIFIA loan, and to the extent that those can be acquired at a lower rate than the TIFIA loan, that may provide Sandag with a cost savings. So it just provides another tool and flexibility there. Section 6.5 of the policy at page 137 or 170 on your tablets is proposed to be updated related to bond to call provisions. This section has always contemplated a call provision which allows a bond to be called prior to its final maturity. The current language explicitly allows that with a specified 10-year call. The proposed language would modify that and would allow Sandag to issue bonds with a shorter or longer call period. And that would just provide some flexibility should Sandag decide it's beneficial at the time of the bond issuance. And finally, section 12 of that policy at page 139 or 172 on your tablets addresses California Senate Bill 1029's requirement for a bond issuer's debt policy to explicitly state that the issuer has internal control procedures that the issuer has implemented or will implement to ensure that the proceeds of the proposed debt issuance will be directed to the intended use. And the text of the statute, the required language is proposed to be included verbatim. Going forward, PFM will review Sandag's current post-issuance compliance procedures to verify that they do properly document the proceeds are being spent according to their intended use, as is current with current practice. There's a few board policies for review without amendment. Board Policy 3, the investment policy, attachment 14 of page 140 or 173 of your tablets. The Director of Finance in consultation with PFM and Cutwater Asset Management has reviewed Board Policy 3, and based on that review, no changes are proposed right now, but the policy does call for the board to renew its delegation of authority to the Executive Director for conducting investments on behalf of Sandag on an annual basis, subject to the limitations that are set forth in that policy. And part of the recommendation before you today is to recommend that the board renew this delegation for the coming year. And finally, Board Policy 32, the San Diego County Regional Transportation Commission interest rate swap policy, attachment 15, 149 or 182 on your tablets, has a specific requirement for annual review. That policy was reviewed by PFM and Sandag Management, and based on this review, no changes are proposed. So, based upon all that, the Executive Committee is asked to discuss the proposed amendments to the Sandag bylaws and board policies, attachments 1 through 13, and either recommend that the Board of Directors approve the proposed amendments or direct staff to return to this committee for further discussion or review, to recommend that the Board of Directors renew the annual delegation of authority to the Executive Director pursuant to Board Policy 3, investment policy, and to recommend that the Board of Directors renew its approval of Board Policy 32, the San Diego County Regional Transportation Commission interest rate swap policy. And that completes my report. I would welcome any questions you have on any of those policies.
Take a drink of water.
Yeah, so take a breath.
Let's bring the second vice chair back.
We're ready for that. We can go either way, right? We're ready for that. We can go either way, right? We're ready for that. We can go either way, right? At the start, I cautioned you that John was very thorough. And I suspect you can appreciate that there's some truth in that. Now that you know all about bands and other things, are there any questions of any of these things? You know, this I guess is a lot of cleanup, adjustments that we need because of circumstances. Let's say coastline and possible need for funding.
So this, we have a lot of changes in the bylaw and the policies. Is this normal on I know it's an annual review, but I think it's a combination of the second vice chair and also some compliance with the state and federal law, and some recommended by staff.
I think that's a fair characterization.
Yeah, and I think this go around because of the second vice chair and where you guys are at, that added to that.
Right.
But I would share with the committee that, a discipline we've tried to have here, which I think is healthy, is that we do take time and review all our policies every year to make sure they're still good. And I could just share with you my past experience as a state employee. Nobody ever says, hey, you did a really good job because you followed the policy. Usually, they pull out the policy when you think you've done something that wasn't according to policy. And the state has policies that go back to the 60s, right, that haven't been modernized. And I really think that, our size allows us to do this probably in a way that's a good discipline that forces us as staff to track where we may need changes, but also then provides an opportunity for you as the policymakers to spend some time and look at these policies and convince yourself that they're still doing what you intended them to do, because that's what we use to do your work, right?
But I think, going back to the second vice chair, I totally agree. I think it strengthened the policy-making process between the committee chairs, the executive committee, and the board, versus the ceremonial second vice VP position. And also, more important is to maintain the sub-regional representation. So I think that balance is there, and I think it's going to work.
Good, thank you. One quick question on probably the most mundane of all these changes, the attendance thing, where we notify if it's 3 consecutive. I'm not sure that's enough.
Right, I agree.
I've seen occasion where 3 out of 4 or 3 out of 5 meetings are missed by a particular subregion. I'd like to see notification if they miss 3 at all, rather than 3 consecutive.
I think that's the purpose of doing that and figuring that out. The history of that, I think, was there was a concern that sometimes at the sub-regional level, the appointments are competitive amongst the different cities, and then you appoint somebody and they don't show up, right? And so that was sort of the history, my recollection of the history of why this has evolved to where it's at. But this is the time to make that kind of change. If that's what you guys want to do.
So you're suggesting 3 in a calendar year?
Yeah.
Rather than 2 consecutive?
Right, because you can attend 1 meeting out of 4.
Yeah.
If I miss 1 meeting, you need to spend hours and hours to recover from that, missing the meeting, to be up to date with the thing. It's a very complex business, and it's a lot of information.
And it's not just getting you back up to speed. It's that subregion loses its opportunity to weigh in. And that's what we're all here for. You want them to be noticed. Yeah. If you decide somebody's not participating, you might want to think of something. Yeah.
Now, the other thing I would highlight, I think our track record of our elections has been pretty good here, but we encourage at the committee meetings that not only the primaries be here, but the alternates be here too. And I think that's another area that has strengthened us, because then not only are the members up to speed, but the alternates are they don't vote, but they're participating in the discussion, right?
What about the attendance in the committees? Do we have any guidelines?
Well, that's what
this is.
So for every,
that's for the PACs.
This is for the PACs.
Do we have a consensus to change it so it's
Fine with me.
you put out a notice if there's 3 meetings missed?
So you're looking for those to be in a calendar year? Do you want that to be alternative? Either 3 consecutive or 3 in a calendar year, if those 3 consecutive bridge?
I would prefer 3 in a calendar year.
Just that?
Yeah. Thank you.
We'll call it the boss.
Well, what about, wait a minute, think about that for a moment. What about if you put, 3 in a calendar year or 3 consecutive? Because what you end up with like November, December they miss, and then they miss January. Well, they only missed 1. You see what I'm saying?
Well, 3 in their term. Okay, so the term is really what, February to February, if I'm not mistaken, because you make your appointments, the chairs, in February.
Yeah.
That would work. So if you didn't do it calendar, if you did it effective.
Okay.
The term. During the 1-year term.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
No pondering that, but, okay.
Yeah, and it really is a notification. It's not taking an action.
Right.
No, it's not.
It's where it really comes in as a sub-regions that think they're represented.
Yeah, we've had a couple of cases where we were kind of shocked when we found some people that were adamant that they be a voting member or something, then we find out they basically didn't attend at all, you know, so
Okay.
but it looked good on their re-election.
Okay, good observation. Anything else that
Like certain council members.
we should put on this? Yes, to recommend to the board. Okay, I need a motion.
So moved.
Earl, second.
Second.
Second. Terry, okay, please cast your votes.
And this is with the amendment, with the change.
Yeah.
Or policy two.
Three consecutives or three in a year, calendar year.
3 in their term, I think, is.
In the
The
term.
term, not calendar year.
In their appointment term.
Okay? And it's closed and that passes unanimously. We have one other item that we'll go through pretty quickly, although it's an important issue. This is our audited comprehensive annual financial report. Okay, Deanne, you're going to start?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair Roberts. Good morning, members of the committee. With us today is Jennifer Farr. Jennifer is a partner with the independent certified public accounting firm of Davis Farr, who has recently concluded the annual audit of Sandag, including the audit of Sandag's comprehensive annual financial report, or the CAFR, for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2016. Jennifer will present the results of the audit, as well as communicate matters to the executive committee in accordance with the statement of auditing standards. Jennifer, please.
Thank you. I've condensed this a little bit because of your time constraints. The Sandag Comprehensive Annual Financial Report was issued on December 15th of 2016. It received an unmodified audit opinion, which is the highest level of opinion that you can receive. The financial statements are consistent with the prior year. However, I wanted to point out two notable changes from the prior year financial statements. One, you'll find some additional disclosures on the fair value hierarchy in accordance with Government Accounting Standards Board Statement number 72. Under this new standard, certain assets and liabilities are required to be categorized as level 1, level 2, or level 3, and that's based on the verifiability of the underlying data that helps the organization determine those estimated amounts. Secondly, you'll find in the financial statements a change in the presentation of certain Sandag funded construction projects, and it only applies to the projects that will ultimately be turned over to another government agency to operate and maintain those assets. Those assets are now presented on a separate line called Assets Held for Future Distribution. Previously, they were called Capital Assets. However, the Government Finance Officers Association, who provides awards for financial reporting, has recommended this alternative presentation, and it has no impact on your financial statements other than to move it from one asset line to another asset line. We're happy to report that the Finance Department was very prepared for the audit. We found the books to be in excellent condition. Other than adjustments detected by the audit process, there were no other material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in internal controls. Additionally, we did not detect any non-compliance with laws or regulations that are direct and material to the financial statements of Sandag. And lastly, we would just like to thank Sandag staff for their efforts during the audit. We are out here working for several months, asking a lot of questions, and they are very patient and professional with us during the process. And we also appreciate the executive committee's commitment to the oversight of the financial statements and the audit process. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Question?
I'll ask Sam's question. What are our current pension liabilities, and how does that affect our financial position?
Right now, your net pension liability is approximately $39 million, actually kind of a small number for some government agencies. And you are approximately 70% funded. So if everyone were to retire today, you have funding already set aside to cover 70% of that obligation. As far, do you want to address how it affects the financial position?
I think the impact is still minimal. Excuse me. So it's represent like a 2% of our long-term debt, 39 million. And it's a direct reduction of that position, but it's in a very small capacity.
And we've set aside a funding mechanism for that, is that correct?
Yes, Andre maybe you can.
Yeah, that's something that the board approved us to open up a Section 115 trust, which we're currently in the middle of selecting a firm to help us do that. So by next year, when you see the financial statements, that will probably be included, which will be a reduction.
And I think we should add, at least from the budgets that we're developing for the next year, the staff's coming back with is the savings that we had from shifting where the agency covered all the pension costs, both the employer and the employee. We've now shifted where the employer's covering the employer pension costs and our employees are covering the employee piece. And we're hoping that those savings that we had will bring back as part of a budget proposal so that we can continue to add to the fund that the board approved last year, so that you can, over time, we can probably grow that piece to try to improve that 70%.
Thank you, Terry. This is an important issue, and we have been reading about it. The CalPERS, they have reduced their investment expectation from 7.5 to 7, but it's still not near the 7. We're at 3 and 3.5 and 1% some years. This is the biggest financial threat to any local government here, and I'm glad we have started something. But we have to monitor it on a yearly basis. Dennis Condito is going to go up from $10 million to $32 million out of $100 million general fund. It's becoming very substantial, and the obligation is going to go, the annual obligation is going to go up substantially, and also the debt is going to pile up because we are not paying enough into the system. We got to monitor it on a yearly basis so we don't have a problem.
Okay. You're working closely with the Sandag's internal auditor, and are there any recommendations that are coming forth that were based on our internal reports?
We do work closely with the internal auditor. We inquire with the internal auditor every year about the work plan, whether or not any reports have been issued and the results of those reports. Generally, we find the internal auditor does an excellent job of identifying issues, getting to the bottom of it, and providing recommendations. So we don't normally have to repeat those recommendations, because by the time we're looking at the work, the issue has already been resolved. But it's an important function, and a function that we rely on to help us understand the risk, and we then use that information to design our audit procedures.
Seems like we're frequently looking at ASB and finding out if there's some new surprise. Is there something on the horizon that we should be aware of that might affect us?
There is. There's one new surprise. It's not a surprise, but similar to when you brought the net pension liability on your books a couple of years back or last year. In 2018, you'll be including a new liability for your other post-employment benefits. Right now, you have assets in that area of about $500,000. If you were to implement that standard today, that would switch to about $1 million liability. So it's just a technical accounting issue that will make that liability now show up on your financials. However, you have, in this case, you have a trust and you've been setting aside money. Very little impact on this organization. Organizations that have not set aside a trust, it'll be a very large impact on their organization.
Absolutely. There was some question about your contract and what about this legal proper ways. Is it something you can touch on?
It says 3-year contract with 2 1-year extension renewal. Actually, the contract ends with the FY17 audit. After FY17 audit, that would be the last year with the current contract. So we're going through a RP process, which is going through our normal procurement process to establish a new contract. So if the same firm were selected, we do follow the California Government Code 12410, which requests the rotation of audit partners every 6 years. So that means, say Davis Farr got selected again, Jennifer will not be our audit partner for the engagement. It's going to be a different partner.
So somebody with us
Yeah.
within.
So to ensure that we have different auditors to look at our books.
Okay, that was the question. If, should that happen?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, anybody have any other things? I appreciate that this is taking a little longer, but is there an action that we need to take on this?
No, Commission.
No. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, that concludes all the business before us. We have, our next meeting is going to be as part of the Corona retreat on February 10th. So hopefully we'll all go. Make sure you, on that part of the retreat, you're there.
So executive meeting still happens, but not here in Verona.
It's a regular.
Before the retreat starts.
It's at 9 o'clock on Friday, same time.
Yeah, not before the retreat
Not
starts.
before the retreat.
That morning.
Before that morning session.
Before the Friday morning session
Yeah.
starts.
So you gotta be careful what you do Thursday night.
For
Gotta
those
get up
of
early.
you,
It might help.
for those of you who indulge in smoking cigars.
No, 2
and
o'clock
other
in the morning,
things,
yeah.
just put this on your schedule. Okay. Thank you. Have a nice weekend.
You too.